Alright, what's up everybody? Rob here. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with pre-Christian traditions of Western Europe. Traditions like the ancient Greeks and their pantheon of gods are incredibly well known. I mean, we have pretty much our entire solar system is named after them. We have spacecraft named after them. Their imagery is pretty much everywhere. Likewise, the Norse mythology is incredibly well known. It's, guys like Thor. I mean, there's a comic book and a movie series named after him or about him. Odin, Tyr, all those guys also very well known and very common. The days of the week are actually named after more or less, pretty much all of them are named after Norse mythology. What is much less well known are the cultural practices of Eastern Europe. Now, I am personally not an expert on this subject. It's something I knew very little about, and I just figured I would look into it and I would share what I learned with all of you guys. So, this is a crash course in Slavic and Russian mythology. Before we go any further, we have to establish who are the Slavs. Here we go. The Slavs are the largest and the most widespread of the Indo-European language groups and are probably descended from the Kurgan culture, which is a prehistoric culture along the shores of the Black Sea, somewhere in the Ukraine, southern Russia, somewhere in that area. Because the Slavs are Indo-European, a lot of their religious practices are very similar to that of other Indo-European groups like the Norse or the Greeks, so there's going to be a lot of crossover between the two. There's going to be a lot of similarities that you're going to see. Now, it's at this point that we run into a particular issue. Because these Slavs are a very widespread group, they're an ethnic group, not necessarily a specific culture, so there is a great deal of cultural variation between all of these different groups, and there is no single unified pantheon. Gods and creatures and practices that were common in one area might be completely unknown in another area. There's really no set codified religious practice amongst all of these different groups. To complicate matters even further, the Slavic groups were illiterate. They did not have a written language system. They did have some pictograms and stuff like that, but an actual codified alphabet really wouldn't come around till the advent of Christianity, or at least till the coming of Christianity. As you can imagine, Christian missionaries were not too fond of pagan myths, and they did not necessarily present them in the most honest of light when they even bothered to record them at all. Now, in spite of the Slavs not having a particular unified pantheon, I am going to talk about two deities that seem to be pretty universal amongst virtually all of the Slavic groups. Again, this is by far not even the tip of the iceberg. This is the tip of the iceberg of Slavic mythology and religious practices. People have made entire academic careers trying to codify these things. I have not. This is just something that I have a passing interest in, so I'd share it with all of you. Alright, so this guy that you see in front of you here is Perun or Perun. I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation, and my pronunciation of foreign words generally sucks anyway. I have limitations, please don't judge me. In any case, Perun is almost always seen as the king of the gods, much like Zeus, and a lot like Zeus and Thor. He is a sky god. He is very associated with thunder, lightning, storms, things of that nature. He's also a war god. He's the god of combat, warfare, fighting, weaponry, warriors, things of that nature. He's also the god of horses, which also does have a martial context to it, cavalry being a thing that exists. His primary weapon, his weapons are lightning bolts, which he hurls at his enemies, much like Zeus. Some sources say that he uses a bow that shoots lightning out of it. Really, again, it depends on regional variation, but still lightning is his main weaponry. He sometimes is depicted as having an axe, which, again, shoots lightning, very much like Mjolnir and Thor. Again, it shows a lot of crossover between Indo-European groups, again, having very similar themes to them. The other god I want to talk about is this guy here. This is Velez, who is found in virtually all Slavic pantheons, and almost every myth about him involves him being an antagonist towards Perun. Velez, sometimes known as Volos, and a couple other pronunciations. Again, my pronunciation sucks anyway, but in any case, he's often depicted as a dragon or serpentine in some way, and he is the god of wealth and magic, commerce, cattle, which is a source of wealth, and one of the main sources of wealth in early Slavic society. He is also associated with rain and possibly the underworld. In this regard, he's actually very similar to the Greek god Hades. Again, a god of the underworld who's associated with wealth. That's where wealth comes from. That's where precious gems, precious minerals come from. And that's what he is associated with. Now, in virtually all Slavic pantheons, Velez and Perun have been at each other's throats. They
have been primordial enemies and are opposite in pretty much every way. Perun, again, like I said earlier, is a sky god. Velez is an earth god. Perun is associated with things like lightning and heat and fire, whereas Velez is associated with things like cold, dampness, water, moisture, and the earth. And so the two are just natural opposing forces with each other. Now, according to many Slavic traditions, the world is a gigantic oak tree. Well, it's a giant tree, probably oak. There are some variants on this in some ways, but you get the idea. In any case, Velez would live underneath the tree, near the roots, and would often try to climb the tree in an attempt to steal something from Perun, who would respond, get angry, and like you do with all thieves, you throw lightning at him, because, who doesn't do that? In any case, Velez would then die, and the death of Velez would release moisture in the form of rain, which would then fertilize the crops and bring life to everyone else. Velez, of course, would not die permanently. Being a serpent, he would be reborn again, much like a serpent shedding his own skin. Now, if you are at all familiar with Norse mythology, this will seem very familiar to you. You have the world tree in Norse mythology, Yggdrasil. Here you just have an unnamed oak tree. You have Velez living underneath the tree in the form of a dragon, very similar to the dragon Nidhogg. And you have Perun, who is occasionally depicted as an eagle, and you have, in Norse mythology, the unnamed eagle on top of Yggdrasil, and the two of them are opposed to one another. Now, in much more general terms, there is a lot of similarities with Norse myth in that there is a thunder god who uses lightning as his primary weapon, and his main antagonist is a giant serpent who's associated with water. Now, how much of this is actually inspired by the Norse and how much of it is purely coincidence, I honestly don't know. The Norse did settle in many lands. They came down the rivers, the Volga and others. They did settle in Slavic territory, and they obviously brought their culture with them. How much of this is coincidence and how much of it is a Norse influence? Honestly, I couldn't say. Now, it's important to note that in Slavic tradition, the ongoing battle between Perun and Velez is not exactly seen as a moral one. There's no real good or evil. It's simply opposing forces that are just clashing with one another. It's simply the natural order at war with itself. They're just clashing elemental forces of nature. This is very unlike Thor and Jormungand, who really are a sign of good and evil. Thor is a good deity. The Midgard serpent is portrayed as a form of evil. And there's a moral implication to this. In Slavic tradition, this really doesn't exist. They're just simply natural forces clashing with one another. It's important to note that the Slavs showed great devotion and respect to both of these deities. Perun being the king of the gods, he would be placed in some position, his idol at least, would be placed in some position of prominence, usually on a hilltop surrounded by the other gods. Interestingly enough, the idol of Velez, who was highly respected as the god of commerce and of cattle and wealth and other similar things, he would not be placed, his idol would not be placed near Perun's. The ongoing animosity can only bring bad luck. Obviously, the two deities hated each other. In any case, Velez's idol would be placed in the cattle market, make him actually much more accessible to the common person. You have the other gods, Perun, and again, whatever regional deities there are, would be placed on a very high, prominent location, whereas Velez would be down in the cattle marketplace, anywhere the average person would go on their day-to-day, in their day-to-day lives, making him much more accessible to the average person.
Now, with the coming of Christianity, the belief in these two gods, as well as the full pantheon, again, there's a lot of regional variations, this was ultimately suppressed. One of the most famous examples was that of Vladimir the Great, who is now a Russian Orthodox saint. He had the statue of Perun pulled down from the high point in the city, thrown into a river where it was cast downstream. Now, while the belief in Perun and the other gods was ultimately suppressed, the belief in various spirits and creatures was eventually combined with that of Christianity, and it formed a very unique set of folk beliefs. So here, in no particular order, are the creatures of Slavic mythology.
Alright, so first up is the Domovoi. By far, he's the most common of creatures within Slavic folklore. He is a house spirit. Actually, that's what his name means. It's something along the lines of he of the house, or the one that is of the house. Every single home has one, and they're usually found under the stove or in a cabinet, possibly in the attic if your house has an attic. Usually some out-of-the-way place where he's not seen very often. Usually it looks like some sort of short, hairy man. You see him right on here. That's more of a modern version of what he looks like. Occasionally they do look like a deceased family member, usually a grandfather or something like that, a patriarch of the family in some case, though he can shapeshift and will occasionally look like a dog or a cat. Snakes as well on occasion too. It really depends on what his mood is. They are rarely seen, but they do tend to bang pots and pans together. They shift around furniture, annoy farm animals, tangle people's hair, generally just cause a nuisance. If they are very angry at you, they will kill off livestock. And if they're really, really angry at you, they'll kill off a family member by smothering them when they sleep. That being said, they are actually basically good spirits. Okay, guys, think about that for a second. This is the most benevolent of all the creatures and spirits that we're going to be talking about today. And as a benevolent spirit, it will smother you in your sleep. What does that say about Slavic society? Or in this particular case, this is a mostly centered around Russia. So what does that say about Russian culture and Russian traditions? And yeah, I can say I'm part Russian. My ancestors are from Russia. I've read, or I tried to slog my way through Dostoevsky. Russian literature and Russian culture is not known for its happiness. And yeah, it might be a stereotype, but every stereotype has a grain of truth to it. So yeah, the most benevolent spirit we're going to be talking about today, and it will smother you in your sleep. Editorializing over. Well, in any case, if you do bribe them or appease them, depending on how generous you want to be, if you basically appease them with food, mostly in the form of bread and milk, I think a little bit of salt on there, depending on the tradition, they will actually be very helpful. They will clean up after minor messes, they'll water plants and help keep them alive if you forget to water them, and they will actually protect your house against thieves. They'll make noise and throw stuff at anybody who tries to break into your house and steal your stuff, which is always very useful to have. Now, if a family does move out of its house, the Domovoi can be invited to come along with them to their new house. You just set out something, usually like an old shoe or an old boot, and it'll slide in there, and you take it off with you, and it'll move into its house. So it's really a family spirit in addition to being a house spirit. That being said, if you move into a house that has a Domovoi of its own, the two will fight each other. They are very, very territorial and will absolutely go tooth and nail at each other until one of them is driven out. Usually, a lot of stories involve the wife of the house grabbing a broom and chasing one of them away. In any case, they're going to be making a racket, knocking stuff over, going no holds barred until one of them is either driven away or, well, vanquished. All right, next up we have the Leshy. The Leshy is a forest spirit, and like the Domovoi, his name pretty much is self-explanatory. It means something along the lines of the forest one, or he of the forest. And though they are always male, they can shapeshift into any form they want. Usually, again, they are human in form, like you see this guy here, this artist's rendering, but they can change into animals if the desire to do so suits them. They can also change their size as well. They can grow up to be taller than the tallest tree, or so small that they can hide behind a blade of grass. Now, they are a guardian spirit, very concerned with protecting the forest from human encroachment, and they are not fans of humanity. They do not like people at all. Now, again, there are many different traditions. Now, some say that they are actively malevolent, seeking to go out of their way to harm humans almost preemptively as a way to protect the forest from human encroachment. Others say that they are simply mischievous and are misunderstood by humans. Either way, they can be extremely dangerous if you encounter them. They will make humans get lost and can force people to wander around in circles in forests. They can change trails, things like that, to make people just basically keep wandering around until they die from exhaustion or exposure. And one other thing that the Leshy can do to mess with people is mimic the appearance and the voice of a loved one, which is a good way to lure people off of trails and into the forest where they eventually get lost. They mimic the person's voice, usually some kind of distress call, and then the person goes out to investigate, trying to help a loved one, and they get drawn deeper and deeper into the forest until they eventually die. If you do see a Leshy in the form of a family member or of a loved one, it's actually easy to tell that it is a Leshy. First off, it does not have eyebrows or eyelashes, and it will not cast a shadow. So that's pretty much a dead giveaway. Even though it does have shape-shifting ability, there is this limitation to it. Now, if you do find yourself confronted by a Leshy, there are two things you can do to escape from it. The first thing is you can make it laugh. Exactly what a Leshy finds funny, I have no idea. Sources are really unclear on this. It just says make them laugh, and yeah, good luck with that. The other thing you can do is put on your clothes backwards, put your shoes on the wrong feet, and then walk backwards away from it, and it'll get confused, and it won't be able to hurt you any further. Okay, now I have to editorialize here for a second. If you're being confronted by a gigantic, size-shifting, shape-shifting, malevolent being that wants to kill you, whether through crushing you to death or leading you off in the forest so you die of hunger and starvation, or tickling you to death, regardless, you're still dead either way. At what point do you think a way to escape him, a good idea would be to take off your clothes, put them on backwards, and then walk away from him backwards? I mean, seriously, how would that even cross somebody's mind? Now, there's probably some sort of mythological reason for it. There's a cultural reasoning behind this. I can't figure out what it is. Really, I don't know what the symbolic rationale behind that would be, what it's trying to say about society in general. I just think it's bizarre that would be like, yeah, I'm being attacked by this creature. Let me take off my clothes and put them on backwards. Well, in any case, next up we have is the Bannock, this guy you see here. He is a bathhouse spirit. Now, many Slavic countries, especially up north, have a public bathhouse in it, very similar to a sauna in Finland and in other far northern countries in Scandinavia. These places would be communal gathering spots where people would gather for cleaning, obviously, but also for fortune telling and divination. The way the divination would work is actually pretty simple. You would expose your back to where the Bannock would be hiding, usually some dark corner out of the way and out of sight, very similar to the way the Domovoi would be hidden out of sight in some out of the way place of a house. Any case, you'd expose your back to where he would be hiding. You would ask a question. If he touched you with the soft part of his hands, you would be getting a positive result to your question. If he scratched you with your claws, that would obviously be a negative result. It's pretty straightforward. At this point in history, the bathhouse was also a place of childbirth, and the Bannock would have to be appeased, otherwise it will take away the child or kill it before it could be baptized. Again, this shows the crossover between pagan beliefs and Christian belief. The tradition of the Bannock is pretty much personifying the clash between Christianity and earlier paganism. The Bannock cannot tolerate any sort of Christian imagery. Icons are not allowed anywhere in the bathhouse, and crosses that would be worn by people who would be entering the bathhouse have to be taken off, otherwise the Bannock will become extremely angry. When angered, the Bannock will attack its victim by either suffocating it to death with steam or by pouring boiling water on them. In order to prevent this, again, you would remove any sort of Christian imagery from the bathhouse, or again, take the cross off of your neck. Just don't even provoke it. You would also leave out offerings of soap, dry towels, and fir branches as part of the last bath of the day for the Bannock's personal use. And also, upon leaving the bathhouse, you're supposed to thank it for its services. So, since we just talked about one water spirit, let's talk about another. This is the Vodyanoi, and it is an extremely malicious creature that lives in lakes and rivers and absolutely hates humans. No surprise there. It looks like a naked old man, or at least basic form is that of an old man, with the head of a toad, the scales of a fish, and the webbed feet of a frog. It is also usually covered in mud or algae, seaweed, anything involving water, stuff like that. When it gets angry, which is pretty often, it will smash up dams and water wheels, sink boats, and drown swimmers, though it doesn't always just kill the swimmer outright, or if the mood suits it, it will take it to its underwater lair, where it will enslave them for the rest of eternity. If that's better or worse, really that's a matter of your own perspective. Fishermen, millers, and anybody who spends time around the water will make a sacrifice to the Vodyanoi in order to appease it, usually in the form of tobacco. You take a pinch of tobacco and you would throw it into the water as an offering to the creature. For some reason, beekeepers are also very keen to appease the Vodyanoi. I don't know enough about beekeeping to say why, just found that to be interesting. If you're going into the water, you would make the sign of the cross in order to ward it off. Now, though it is malicious and does not like people, it will actually help fishermen if you do give it a piece of tobacco, but this is rare, and honestly, I wouldn't count on it. So, in short, the Vodyanoi is an ugly fishman that hates people. Right, the next spirit on our list is the Rusalka. The Rusalka is a nymph that lives in bodies of water, much like the Vodyanoi, and they are very similar to Western mermaids and the Greek siren. The Rusalka are young and attractive women, or appear as young and attractive women, who sleep during the day and come out at night. They tend to be more active during the summer. They have very pale skin and very long unbound hair, which could be blonde or light brown, but sometimes are green. Again, they are water spirits, so this is very akin to something like seaweed. Their skin could also have a greenish tint to it as well, very algae-like. They spend their time combing their hair or placing flowers in it to make themselves more beautiful. A lot like the sirens of Greek mythology, they lure men with their beauty to their deaths. Why do they do this? It really depends. In some traditions, they do this because that's just their nature. It's just what they do. Other traditions say that they are women who, or these are the souls of women who died from suicide. Usually over the case of unrequited love or their jilted lovers or something of that nature. And they will seek vengeance on those that have wronged them. And once they are avenged, they will then be able to rest in peace. There are numerous other traditions that I'm not going to get into here. They all agree, though, that they are young, attractive women who lure men to their death with their beauty. Basically, this is the Russian equivalent of Greek sirens, though they are associated with smaller bodies of water and not the ocean. That's pretty much the big difference, but basically it's the same thing. They tend to be most active in the summer, like I said, especially during Rusalka week, which is usually in early June. It's at this point in time that the Rusalka leave their watery homes and travel on land, where they spend most of their time, again, making themselves appear beautiful, spend a lot of time swinging in tree branches, like you see here, sitting on the tree branches, combing their hair, singing, and basically, and just generally trying to make themselves more attractive to men so they could drag them down to a watery grave. Swimming is absolutely forbidden during Rusalka week for obvious reasons. Honestly, you just don't want to be anywhere near these ladies, otherwise they will absolutely kill you. Okay, I'm going to editorialize here for a second, and you're just going to have to forgive me. I'm sorry, but I just have to get this off my chest. Okay, so there you are, walking through the woods at night, which is your first problem. I mean, because, I've never heard of a story that starts with, I was walking through the woods in the middle of the night, and it ends with, and we lived happily ever after. It doesn't happen. These things don't exist. If it is, somebody let me know. But yeah, walking through the woods at night, bad idea. So you're sitting there, walking through the woods at night, and you see this chick just sitting there in a tree branch combing her hair. Tell me, how does this not scream trap to you? How does this not scream, this is a trap, this is an ambush, this is going to end badly? You're walking through the woods, and you see this chick just sitting there, combing her hair, trying to make herself look beautiful, in the middle of the woods at night, swinging from tree branches. Yeah, that's a problem. Get as far away from her as possible. Just trust me on this. This cannot end well for you. It just screams ambush, it screams trap, it screams problems. Just trust me. Make it, just don't do that. You'll thank me for this. So anyway, there's the Rusalka, basically the Russian equivalent of the siren. Alright, so next up, there's something a little bit different here. This is not a creature or a spirit, but actually a character in many folktales. This is Koschi the Deathless, also occasionally translated as Koschi the Immortal. Koschi the Deathless is a sorcerer-type figure who has the appearance of a frail old man, but possesses the strength and vitality of someone who is much younger. He's often the antagonist in many folktales about him, most famously the tale titled The Death of Koschi the Deathless, or Myra Morvena. He is most famous for his death, or his soul in some translations, being located inside of a needle, which is inside of an egg, which is inside of a duck, which is inside of a hare, which is inside of an iron chest, which is either buried under an oak tree or on a mythical island. Until the needle is broken, any damage done to Koschi is harmless, but if the needle is broken, he will die pretty much instantly. Again, not really a creature, but just something part of Russian and Slavic folklore, way too good to pass up. So that brings us to our final entry for this video, probably the most famous entity in Russian and Slavic mythology and folklore tradition. I am, of course, talking about none other than Baba Yaga, who can kill 3 men in a bar with a fucking pencil. Oh, come on, guys. You knew I was going to say something about this. I mean, seriously. You saw that coming a mile away, I'm positive. If you didn't, well, I can't help you there. Any case, small aside here, I just thought that the first movie had a better storyline, but I really did like the world building and the setup of the second one. Make it part of a wider franchise. Another discussion for another day. Anyway, this is the real Baba Yaga. She's a recurring character in many folk tales, a lot like Koschi the Deathless. She often takes the role of the evil witch living in the forest, very similar to much more Western tales. She's depicted as an ugly old woman, as you can see here, and she usually lives far away from society in the middle of a forest, really isolated from civilization. Her home is famous for being a very small hut that can move under its own power because it stands on top of a set of chicken legs. She's also famous for riding around on a mortar and pestle, like you can see here, very similar to a witch in Western folktales riding around on their brooms. She is a thoroughly evil character and will often go out of her way to hinder the hero of the story, usually threatening to eat them or just harm them in some way, but can also be a source of aid and usually will help out the hero if they complete certain tasks for Baba Yaga or surviving some sort of a test that she sets out for them. Now, Baba Yaga can often sense the approach of a hero by claiming that she can smell their Russian blood. This implies that she is not only separate from society and living in the forest and all that, but perhaps a holdover from an earlier pagan tradition, that she's somehow not part of that world, that she's not, in line with what mainstream society is. Either case, she's probably one of the most famous of Russian and Slavic folk characters, and I just figured I'd add it in, way too good to pass up.
All right, guys, I hope you found that interesting and entertaining. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe. Next video is going to be coming out, I don't know when, pretty much whenever I get around to it and when I come up with something that's interesting to me that I want to film and want to talk about. Till then, have a good day. If not, well, I can't help you there. You're an adult. Have whatever day you want. See you later.